When a psychologically healthy person ends a relationship, there is usually a recognizable structure to how it happens, even if it hurts. They explain their reasons, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes imperfectly, but with a sense of finality. They close communication channels. They allow themselves to grieve, and most importantly, they leave the other person with a clear ending, a place to feel the pain fully, to understand what happened, and then, slowly, to move forward. It is painful, yes, but it has shape, and that sense of closure is precisely what allows healing to begin. But everything changes when the one who walks away is a narcissist. Have you noticed this? There is no complete explanation. No clear final sentence you can hold on to. Instead, there is a cold, sudden withdrawal, sometimes wrapped in prolonged silence, sometimes in vague, half-finished statements that sound almost like a breakup, yet never fully are. Just enough ambiguity to leave you suspended. And the person left behind you often enters a state that countless others describe in eerily similar ways. Your thoughts spin endlessly, replaying every moment to ask, "What did I do wrong?" Sleep becomes difficult because your mind is desperate to understand what just happened. You feel pain and hope at the same time, abandoned, yet somehow still tethered, as if the story refuses to end. And this is the crucial point. It is not only the loss of the person that hurts, it is the uncertainty. You are not just grieving someone's absence. You are suffering because you no longer know where you stand in the story. Were you truly discarded, or were you merely set aside? Has your value vanished, or are you being kept in some invisible waiting room? That ambiguity cuts far deeper than clean loss ever could. Yet, if you step back and observe carefully, something unsettling becomes clear. When narcissists leave, they rarely shut every door. They often keep threads open, continuing to watch, lingering on the edges, preserving the option to return. And this is where an uncomfortable truth begins to surface. What you experienced was not a genuine ending at all. It was the illusion of an ending, a carefully engineered disruption designed to throw you into confusion, pain, and self-doubt, while keeping you emotionally orbiting around them. A narcissist discard is an illusion. It was never an ending. It is a test, a way to reassert control, a method of keeping you psychologically engaged, even in their absence. And in today's video, we are going to unpack exactly why narcissists leave in this particular way, what is really happening behind that silence, and most importantly, how you can see through the illusion and step out of the game entirely without needing to win or lose against anyone, but simply by reclaiming yourself. And it is precisely from the moment you begin to sense that this doesn't feel like a real ending that we need to face a difficult but deeply liberating truth. For a narcissist, what you experience as a discard is rarely an actual departure. It is not a door being closed. It is a stage change. When a psychologically healthy person ends a relationship, their presence usually fades in a coherent way. Contact decreases, monitoring stops, distance is accepted, and time is allowed to do its work. A narcissist does something very different. They do not exit the story. They simply step out of the spotlight and move into the wings where they can observe. And this is the critical point. If they had truly chosen someone else, if they genuinely no longer needed you, the most logical action would be to close every path back. But that is not what happens. They rarely block you completely. They often keep you visible on social media. They still watch your stories. They still appear in places where you can sense their presence, a view, an online status, a calculated coincidence. They do not speak, yet they do not disappear. They do not give closure, yet they do not continue. This is not confusion. This is design. In narcissistic psychology, ambiguity is not an accident. It is a form of power. When there is no clear ending, your mind is forced to fill in the gaps. You begin to wonder, have they found someone new? Do I still matter? What happens if I stay silent? Those questions keep your nervous system activated, and that is exactly the state the narcissist needs you in. Not to love you, but to monitor you, to keep you waiting, to keep you reflecting their importance. Here is something crucial to understand. A A narcissist never leaves in a way that removes their ability to return. They do not burn the bridge. They cross it and stand on the other side, watching to see whether you remain there. If you suffer, they feel secure. If you are confused, they feel secure. If you react, they feel secure. Every reaction confirms one thing: I am still at the center of this person's emotional world. This is why so many people internalize a painful belief. They chose someone else, and I was left behind. But structurally, that interpretation misses the point. A narcissist does not choose in the sense of attachment. They allocate supply. The new stage is not a new love. It is simply another audience, one that offers admiration more easily, asks fewer questions, and reflects less truth. And you? You are the backstage pass, the place they are confident they can return to if the external validation runs dry. The most accurate metaphor is not replacement, but shelving. You were not erased from the play. You were set aside within it. And what makes this so psychologically damaging is not the act of leaving, but the refusal to define your role. You are suspended between endings and hopes, between abandonment and connection. That liminal state is one of the most exhausting experiences the human psyche can endure. Once you understand that discard is actually a stage change, many confusing patterns begin to make sense. Why they still watch you after leaving. Why they return just as you start to stabilize. Why they vanish when you need them most and reappear when you begin to detach. Because the goal was never to leave, it was to maintain access, to step onto a different stage while keeping the backstage key. And this is the core truth you need to hear clearly. The moment you believe they chose someone else, you unknowingly position yourself as the loser in a game you never agreed to play. But when you see the real structure that this is a staged maneuver, not a mature ending, you begin to reclaim authorship over your reality. You are no longer someone who was discarded. You are someone standing at a threshold, deciding whether you will continue to stand on that stage at all. The hard truth is this: a narcissist only truly leaves when they lose the right to return. And if they still exist anywhere in your life, even silently, then what you experienced was never an ending. It was only a scene change, carefully staged to see what you would do next. From that perspective, a deeper layer of meaning begins to emerge. What a narcissist is actually doing after what they call a breakup is not leaving, but placing you on a shelf, a familiar mechanism in how they manage the people around them. When you view the relationship through an emotional lens, their behavior appears confusing, contradictory, even cruel. But when you shift the lens to one of psychological resource management, the pattern becomes cold, calculated, and disturbingly logical. Research on narcissistic personality traits, particularly within grandiose and vulnerable narcissism, consistently shows that narcissists do not form attachments based on mutual emotional exchange. Instead, they form connections based on ego regulation functions. Studies published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology indicate that individuals high in narcissism tend to maintain multiple inactive relational ties, simultaneously not fully investing, yet never fully cutting off, in order to maximize access to validation when needed. In other words, they do not build relationships, they manage portfolios. Within this structure, you are not removed from the system, you are temporarily deactivated. And this distinction matters. Being removed means you have no value. Being shelved means you still hold value, just not in use at the moment. This explains why they rarely block you completely, erase all traces, or close every door. You remain visible, accessible, within reach, like a backup device stored away for future use. To a narcissist, people are not experienced as autonomous individuals with inner worlds. They are experienced as functions that soothe, reflect worth, absorb emotional chaos, and stabilize inner emptiness. And when a function has worked well in the past, it is never fully discarded. It is simply optimized for timing. Many people struggle to understand why, after causing so much damage, a narcissist still assumes they can return. The answer lies in a very specific belief. They believe in the wound they created in you. Research on trauma bonding, beginning with Patrick Carnes and later expanded through neuropsychology, demonstrates that relationships built on intermittent reinforcement create powerful neural attachments. When the brain is exposed to prolonged uncertainty, it often clings to the very source of pain in an attempt to regain stability. The narcissist, consciously or not, bets on this mechanism. They assume that after sudden withdrawal, confusion, and emotional collapse, you will not be able to leave quickly. They assume you will need time to recover, and during that time, emotional ties will remain active. That assumption allows them to shelve you without fear of losing psychological access. This behavior is not driven by love or hatred, but by a severe deficit in self-regulation. A 2019 study on emotion regulation in individuals high in narcissism found significant difficulty in calming their nervous systems without external validation. Without reflection, they experience emptiness, irritability, and inner unrest. Keeping former sources nearby is not nostalgia, it is psychological survival. The shelf serves three primary functions. First, it waits for the collapse of the new stage. Narcissistic relationships often begin with intensity, but lack depth, and clinical surveys show these cycles are significantly shorter than healthy bonds. When new supply begins asking questions or reflecting uncomfortable truths, the narcissist looks for familiar ground. Second, the shelf is accessed when emotional regulation is needed, sometimes through vague messages or subtle signals. Third, and most unsettling, it waits for your weakness. They do not return when you are strong. They return when you are stable enough to open the door, but not strong enough to close it. What makes this mechanism especially cruel is that it strips you of personhood without overt violence. You are not told where you stand. You are not allowed to choose your role. You are left waiting while their life continues. And the deepest pain is not being shelved, but realizing you believed you were in an equal relationship when you were, in fact, being managed as a resource. Yet here lies the fracture they never anticipate. The shelving mechanism only works if you remain on the shelf. It collapses the moment you understand that you are not a function, not a resource, and not a backup. When you withdraw energy, reaction, and availability, the shelf becomes meaningless. And that is when their entire logic of control begins to break apart. At this point, a crucial question must be asked directly. If a narcissist does not truly leave, if they keep you within reach, why do they choose such a cruel form of cutting off? The answer is not emotional. It is about power. More precisely, it is a deliberate power reset designed to shift the psychological balance as quickly as possible. Research on interpersonal power and emotional manipulation consistently shows that power does not belong to the loudest voice, but to the one who destabilizes the other's inner orientation. A review published in Personality and Individual Differences found that individuals high in narcissistic traits frequently use cognitive disruption strategies, sudden withdrawal, silence, and ambiguity to weaken others' ability to assess reality. When you do not understand what is happening, you lose equal footing. You begin searching for fault within yourself. That is the moment power changes hands. The act of pretending to cut off is rarely impulsive. It often occurs precisely when you begin asking for clarity, consistency, or emotional safety. Clinical surveys of toxic relationship patterns show that more than 60% of abrupt breakups involving narcissistic traits happen immediately after the partner raises questions about boundaries, future plans, or accountability. In other words, when you approach truth, they pull the plug not to leave, but to disorient. This shock produces three primary psychological effects. First, it creates acute confusion. The human brain despises uncertainty. When a relationship ends without explanation, the prefrontal cortex responsible for logic becomes overwhelmed, while the limbic system associated with fear and attachment is highly activated. Neuroimaging studies on social rejection show that ambiguous abandonment activates brain regions associated with physical pain. You are not simply sad, you are shocked. Second, the cut pushes you into self-doubt. When information is missing, The brain fills the gaps rarely in your favor. Research on attribution bias demonstrates that in intimate relationships, people tend to blame themselves when the other withdraws suddenly. Was I too sensitive? Did I ask for too much? Did I do something wrong? This internal questioning erodes self-trust faster than direct insults ever could. Third, and most importantly for the narcissist, it pushes you into repair mode. When you believe the problem lies within you, you attempt to fix it. You explain, you clarify, you try to do better. Studies on emotional dependence show that ambiguous breakups significantly increase the likelihood that the abandoned partner will reinitiate contact even after harmful relationships. This is when power returns to the narcissist without their presence. Within this structure, cruelty is not a side effect, it is the tool. The narcissist does not need you to hurt because of them. They need you confused about yourself. Confusion destabilizes your internal anchor, making them the only reference point even in silence. That is why many describe the aftermath not only as heartbreak, but as a loss of orientation, as if reality itself has tilted. This behavior may not always be fully conscious, but it is systematic. Research on narcissistic interpersonal strategies shows that sudden withdrawal produces stronger reactions than direct confrontation. Silence, applied at the right moment, is more effective than argument. Once it delivers control, it becomes reflexive. Thus, pretending to cut off is a board reset. It erases your demands. It blurs the boundaries you were forming. It moves you from questioning to seeking answers. And in power dynamics, nothing is stronger than making someone doubt their own perception. The conclusion must be stated plainly. There is no power greater than the power that makes you doubt yourself. The narcissist does not need to be right. They only need you uncertain that you are. When that happens, control no longer requires presence. You will carry it forward until you see the mechanism and step out of it. From that shift in power, another illusion almost immediately takes hold in the mind of the one left behind, the new person. It is no coincidence that right after the staged cutoff, your thoughts become consumed by someone else. This is where pain is twisted into comparison, and comparison almost always leads to self-diminishment. But to understand what is truly happening, you must step out of the emotional frame and look directly at the structure of the narcissist's choice. The new person is not a replacement. They are simply an easier audience. In personality psychology, particularly in research on narcissistic supply, one conclusion remains consistent. Narcissists do not seek better relationships. They seek less threatening sources of feedback. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Research in Personality found that individuals high in narcissistic traits choose new partners based on ease of control and low levels of questioning, rather than deep compatibility. In other words, they do not upgrade. They lower the level of light. This explains why the new person often shares three characteristics. First, they see less. Not because they are less intelligent, but because they lack data. You saw contradictions and role shifts because you stayed long enough to connect the dots. The new person sees only the surface. Surveys on early-stage relationships with narcissistic partners show that over 70% of participants felt deeply understood and uniquely chosen within the first 3 to 6 months before inconsistencies emerged. This is not depth, it is stagecraft. Second, the new person asks fewer questions. Research on attachment styles shows that individuals with anxious or avoidant attachment are more likely to be drawn into narcissistic relationships early on because they tolerate ambiguity to preserve connection. Fewer questions mean fewer boundaries and less accountability. No one examines the cracks. No one demands consistency. Third, and most critically, the new person reflects less truth. Human psychological growth depends on honest reflection from others, but narcissists cannot tolerate that reflection. Studies on narcissistic injury demonstrate that exposure to one's own inconsistencies triggers defensive responses similar to identity threat. You reflected truth simply by being yourself stable, clear, and perceptive. The new person does not. That is why they feel safer. This is where the urge to prove your worth often ignites. Your mind compares appearance, personality, status, success. But the comparison rests on a false premise. The narcissist did not choose someone better, they chose someone dimmer. This says nothing about your value and nothing about the other person's worth. It reveals only a fear of light. Clinical data on narcissistic relationship cycles reveal a striking repetition. The same script, the same language, the same sequence of idealization, devaluation, and withdrawal copied almost exactly from one relationship to the next. Longitudinal studies show that over 80% of individuals high in narcissistic traits reuse identical phrases, promises, and interaction strategies across partners. The new person is not entering a new story. They are stepping onto an old stage. Ironically, the very qualities that made you difficult, seeing clearly, asking questions, reflecting truth, are what made you dangerous. In the narcissist's world, difficult means exposure. Exposure means loss of control, so they leave the brightly lit stage for a darker one. But they keep backstage access, because when that stage collapses, as it almost always does, they need to know whether the old light is still on. One final point is essential to end comparison entirely. The new person did not take your place. That place was never fully given to anyone. In narcissistic dynamics, there is no stable role of equal partner. There are only temporary functions for emotional regulation. When you no longer served that function, not because you diminished, but because you saw too much, they changed roles, not for better, but for easier. The conclusion must remain clear and unsentimental. They did not choose someone better. They chose somewhere darker. And your light did not disappear because they turned away. It only became unbearable to someone who survives in shadow. And at this point, once you truly understand that their leaving was never a real departure, but merely a stage change, the next thing you must face is how they return. Not loudly, not directly, not with a clear declaration. A narcissist comes back quietly, through narrow openings in your inner world. They do not return to love, they return to verify access, and to do that, they never rely on a single tactic. They use 7 different doors, each designed to activate a deeply human, instinctive psychological response. Door 1, the curiosity door. This is the lightest door, and the one most commonly used at the beginning. It does not look like a conversation. It looks insignificant. A story view moments after you post. A late like. A stray emoji. A message so short you do not know whether it deserves a reply. And that uncertainty is precisely the mechanism. The human brain is wired to orient toward incomplete signals, especially when they come from a source associated with past pain. You do not need to still love them to react. The moment you think, "That's strange," your attention has already turned toward them. And for a narcissist, attention is power. This door activates the brain's orienting response, the reflex that makes you turn toward a stimulus before evaluating its meaning. The only way to close this door is not to clarify, not to respond politely, but to give no return signal at all. Door 2, the memory door. When curiosity alone is not enough, they move deeper into memory. A song from the past, a familiar place, a comment that seems casual. "I passed by there today." Memory is not static data. Each time it is activated, it reopens with its emotional charge. This is especially potent when the memory comes from a time when you were weakest, trying hardest, believing that endurance would fix everything. A narcissist does not recall these moments out of longing. They recall them because memory bypasses logic. This door activates the limbic system, softening you emotionally before thought can intervene. The way to close this door is not to deny memory, but to refuse to act from it. Remembering is human. Acting on memory is the trap. Door 3, the compassion door. This is the most dangerous door for people with empathy. A vague message about hardship. "I don't know who else to talk to." An unfinished confession designed to make you feel uniquely capable of understanding. This is not a request for help, it is a test. The moment you respond, they gain critical information. Your emotional door is still open. The brain here activates attachment and caregiving circuits, the urge to soothe distress, to restore balance. The way to close this door is brutally simple. Do not step back into the rescuer role, not out of cruelty, but because you now understand that this role is what kept you trapped. Door 4, the presence door. When words fail, they use visibility. They begin appearing where you might notice them through mutual connections, familiar locations, social media traces, coincidences that make you wonder if they are intentional. The injured mind is quick to assign meaning to coincidence, and the moment you start interpreting what do they want, you have re-entered their orbit. This door activates monitoring behavior, watching instead of living. The way to close it is not avoidance, but refusing interpretation. No meaning assigned, no story built. Door 5, the hope door. This is the most sophisticated door. They speak the language of insight, healing terms, apologies that sound mature, phrases you once used. The brain, eager to believe suffering was not meaningless, lights up with hope. But here is the cold truth. Real change does not require your return as proof. A narcissist's change always does. This door activates reward prediction, the system that encourages risk-taking in pursuit of this time it will be different. The way to close it is to observe behavior, not words. No argument required. Just non-participation. Door 6, the instability door. When hope no longer works, they reverse direction. Blame, provocation, anger, emotional debt. The goal is not truth, it is dysregulation. An angry person is easily drawn into debate, and debate is the narcissist's home stage. This door activates the fight or flight response, racing heart, defensive speech, urgency. The only way to close it is refusing to engage in argument, not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer playing. Door 7, the comparison door. This is the most painful door. The new person, the new life, displayed not to celebrate, but to provoke reaction. Social exclusion pain activates the same neural pathways as physical pain, and pain creates urgency to check, compare, prove worth. But every glance, every question of why not me, feeds them. The way to close this door is rejecting comparison altogether. Not because you are inferior, but because you see the truth. They did not choose better, they chose darker. These 7 doors exist not because you are weak, but because you are human. And once you can name them, you no longer need to fight the narcissist. You simply close doors through behavior, not explanation. No defending, no clarifying, no testing. When the doors remain closed long enough, your nervous system relearns safety. You stop scanning them as threat, stop seeking them as reward, stop waiting for them as resolution. And what happens then is not that they disappear, it is that they no longer have a way into you. And here's where a colder paradox finally shows itself. What terrifies a narcissist most is not you leaving, but you becoming unreadable. You see, a narcissist does not survive on love in the normal sense. They survive on prediction. They need to know what you are thinking so they know which lever to pull. They need to sense whether you are sad or angry so they can decide whether to play the victim or act indifferent. They need to detect whether you are still waiting or already done, so they can choose whether to send a soft signal or launch a stronger attack. In their inner system, you are not treated as a separate human being with a sovereign inner world. You become an emotional GPS. And the moment that GPS stops transmitting, they panic, not because they lost you, but because they lost coordinates. Because a narcissist can only control what they can predict. And they can only predict you when you keep giving them data. This is what many people miss. Every time you explain yourself, you hand them information. Every time you say, I'm hurting, I'm disappointed, I just want you to understand, you reveal where the pressure points are. And a narcissist, operating like a psychological predator, treats those pressure points like a control panel. They press a button, you react. They do not need mind reading. They only need behavioral patterns. Over time, they study you the way someone studies a habit. How many messages you send when you are ignored. How quickly you apologize when blame is flipped onto you. How desperately you seek clarity when they leave things unresolved. Their power is not real strength. It is data gathered long enough to predict you like a weather forecast. So when you go silent in the true sense, not the kind of silence that says, "Come, chase me," but the silence of role withdrawal, the silence that refuses to supply data, you cut off the one thing they use to navigate. No data, no signal, no map, and without a map, they are forced to guess. Guessing means losing control. Watch what happens when they realize you are no longer reacting according to the old script. They view your stories unusually fast, drop an out-of-place like ask about you through other people, appear by coincidence through mutual circles, post indirect messages, revive old memories, or suddenly act kind as if they are checking whether the old version of you is still there. That is the surveillance loop, not because they miss you, but because they need to measure whether you are still within reach or have moved into a blind spot. And blind spots are what narcissists hate most, because they build their entire life on two things: image and control. Image is how they exist. Control is how they feel safe. When you are silent, they no longer know what their image looks like inside you. Do you still admire them, fear them, blame yourself, crave their validation? And once you stop feeding signals, they begin generating hundreds of scenarios in their mind, many of which lead to one terrifying conclusion: I'm not the center anymore. But a narcissist cannot tolerate not being the center. To them, not being the center feels like becoming invisible. And invisibility is a kind of psychological death they have spent their whole life running from. So when you stay silent, they will attempt to pull you back using anything that can provoke a reaction. Sweet one moment, cold the next. I'm sorry one day, you're ungrateful the next. I miss you then. Who do you think you are? Do not mistake this for random moodiness. This is door testing. They are trying keys, searching for the one opening in you that still responds. They are firing signals to see whether your internal radar still turns toward them. And the moment you reply even one sentence, they get fresh data. You still hear them, you still feel, you are still inside the web. And where there is data, there is power. Because from that data, they can rebuild their predictions. What makes you soften? What makes you break? What makes you defend? What makes you doubt yourself? But when you keep disciplined silence, something deeper happens than they can't pull you back. You disrupt their entire internal algorithm. You remove their ability to plan. And for a control-addicted personality, losing the ability to plan is panic. They monitor more, but the more they monitor, the less they understand, because you give them nothing to decode. The more they watch, the emptier it becomes. The more they measure, the more wrong they are. And repeated wrongness pushes them into the state they hate most: helplessness. Here is the key. You do not need to scare them. You only need to stop doing what they expect. Stop providing data. Stop turning emotion into a report. Stop turning your life into a screen they can track. Your silence is not punishment. It is the reclamation of psychological privacy, the one thing they use to enter and exit as if your inner world belonged to them. And when you reclaim that privacy, they do not simply lose you, they lose the tool, they lose the map, they lose coordinates, they lose predictive power. And when a narcissist cannot predict you, they no longer know how to manipulate you. They no longer know which story to build to destabilize you. They no longer know which role to perform to make you open the door. The less signal you give, the more power they lose, not because you become stronger to defeat them, but because you become a territory they cannot access anymore. That is what true silence does. It does not end them, it ends the control channel. And from that moment, your life begins returning to its rightful owner, you. And once you understand why your silence makes them lose the map, you start to see what comes next, something even colder. Some narcissists do not explode right away. They do not always scream, retaliate publicly, or erupt into obvious rage. Instead, they enter a different kind of breakdown, a silent collapse. Not dramatic, not loud, but deep. Deep like a wall that looks solid on the surface, yet begins cracking underneath the paint because the inside has been rotting for a long time. And the most important thing to understand is this: they are not collapsing because they miss you. And they are not collapsing because they are hurting from love. They collapse because the structure collapses, the psychological structure they use to exist. That structure often stands on 3 layers. The first is the image layer. A narcissist does not live from essence, they live from surface. They need to be seen in a very specific way. Important, desirable, magnetic, powerful. And in the relationship, you were part of that projection system. Even if you never intended it, your attention helped them feel real. So when you go silent, the first thing that cracks is the image mask. They begin to feel the urge to prove themselves. You may notice them posting more, performing more, shining more, but with a strange urgency. They try to force a reaction somewhere to confirm they still matter. They may display a new social life, a new person, new success, constant busyness. But if you look closely, the energy is not confidence, it is strain. They are trying to make the world say something they cannot say to themselves. I have value. And when that sentence does not come from you, the mirror that mattered most, their image begins to feel like it is slipping. Then they move into the second layer, the control layer. This is where you see their tactics intensify. A narcissist cannot tolerate the fact that something that used to work is now useless. Before, a withdrawal made you panic, coldness made you self-blame, ambiguity made you explain. That was power. But now, because your silence stops feeding data, those tactics stop working. And when a control-addicted person loses their control tools, they become like someone pressing a button over and over while the door refuses to open. They overheat. This overheating may not turn into loud rage. It can turn into chaotic behavior, probing, baiting, switching tones rapidly, sweet 1 minute and cruel the next, playing wounded and then attacking. Inside them, the system is screaming, I'm losing power. And to a narcissist, losing power is not just uncomfortable, it feels like a threat to existence, because their sense of safety is built on other people still reacting to them. But the deepest layer is where the real collapse happens. The identity layer. This is where many people misunderstand them. You assume their ego is strong because they are arrogant, cold, and ruthless. In reality, it is often the opposite. The core is unstable and hollow, so they must build an identity out of external reflection. They need other people's confirmation to know who they are. They need other people to be activated so they can feel they have weight, influence, significance. When you stay silent, you do not only cut communication, you cut reflection. And without reflection, the false self begins to fail like a room without support beams. This is when they fall into feelings they cannot name easily. Emptiness, agitation, confusion, doubt, and sometimes paranoia, the sense that something is happening that I cannot control. They begin to imagine, invent stories, create scenarios to fill the void. They may tell themselves you are pretending, playing a game, waiting to revenge, because they cannot tolerate a simpler truth. You stepped off the stage, and here is the core point. They collapse because they lose the mechanism of regulating themselves through other people. A healthy adult can self-regulate, process sadness, cool anger, find meaning in emptiness. A narcissist often cannot. They regulate through external fuel, through your attention, your reactions, your explanations, your pain. You were the emotional air conditioning system for an unstable inner world. When you stop, the system loses electricity, and the collapse can happen without noise because it is the collapse of something that was always built from illusion, control, and borrowed reflection. There is one detail you must hold on to so you do not fall into the trap at this stage. During silent collapse, they may return appearing more vulnerable, more human, more real. They may speak as if they have awakened. But stay clear. Many times, this is not growth. It is survival behavior from a self that is starving for supply. What you are seeing is the cracking of a mask, not the birth of a stable self. And if you open the door out of compassion alone, you become the support beam again. So if there is one thing you should carry from this segment, it is this. Your silence does not destroy them with hatred. It simply reveals the truth that their structure depended on you. And when you no longer reflect them, they are forced to face the emptiness they have been running from. That is why this collapse is terrifying for them and liberating for you, because you finally see it. Their power was never inside them. It was in their access to you. And once you understand why they panic, why their inner structure begins to fracture when you fall silent, the most important question is no longer, what will they do next? But rather, what do you need to do so you are never pulled back in again? This is the moment where analysis must turn into practical action. And this is where the exit blueprint begins: 3 practical layers of defense, not built on emotion, not built on willpower, but built on structure. Layer 1, the nervous system. Lower the activation. To leave a narcissist for good, you have to accept a blunt but liberating truth. Most people do not return because they still love. They return because their nervous system is still conditioned. You are not only fighting memories, you are fighting reflexes. A racing heart when you see their name, a tight stomach when you hear their voice, a mind that spirals when a half message lands. That is why the first layer of defense is not positive thinking. It is reducing triggers, like fixing a faulty alarm system that screams at every sound. First, lower the noise. Cutting contact is not punishment, it is nervous system recovery. Block numbers, turn off notifications, route communication through one channel only if you must, for shared parenting, for example, and set response rules like a safety valve. Reply only within a fixed time window, when you are regulated, never while shaking or furious. You must also reduce the hidden triggers people forget. Rereading old chats, replaying photos, checking their social media, revisiting songs and places tied to them. Every time you do that, you re-inject the trigger into your own system, and then wonder why you cannot detach. Treat those behaviors like exposed wiring. Touch it, you get shocked. At the nervous system layer, you do not need heroic willpower. You need steady regulation, sleep, food, water, movement. It sounds simple, but this is where you reclaim biological control. Walk 20 minutes daily, take warm showers, breathe slowly, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Reduce caffeine if anxiety is spiking. Eat enough protein so your brain does not drop into instability. When the body calms, the mind finally has space. Add one practical tool, the delay gap. Any urge to message, explain, or demand clarity, delay it by 30 minutes. In that half hour, do something physical. Wash your face, clean a surface, walk downstairs, step outside and breathe. A narcissist wins by accessing your reflex. You win by unplugging that reflex. This is the foundation. Without it, every other layer is just beautiful theory. Layer 2. Cognition. Change the question. Once your nervous system begins to settle, you enter the second layer, cognitive restructuring. This is where many people stay stuck, because the narcissist does not only cause pain, they swap the question in your mind. You get pulled into, did they love me? Why did they do this? What did I do wrong? If I said the perfect thing, would it have changed everything? These questions sound reasonable, but they are a perfect trap. They place the narcissist at the center and place you in the role of the person who must solve the mystery. And if you are still chasing answers, you are still orbiting them. Changing the question changes the power. Instead of, do they love me? Shift to, what do they need from my reaction? Instead of, what do they think about me? Shift to, what state are they trying to create inside me? Instead of, how do I get them to understand? Shift to, if they never understand, what life do I build to stay at peace? This is not wordplay. This is how you cut manipulation at the root. Narcissistic power lives inside your interpretation. When you change the frame, you take reality back. Use a simple map to avoid ambiguity. Any behavior that makes you 1. Confused, 2. Self-blaming, 3. Urgently proving yourself is usually about control, not connection. Learn to separate content from function. Content is what they say. I miss you. I've changed. You're overreacting. Function is the goal. Pull a reaction, soften you, drag you into debate. When you see function, content loses its hypnosis. A powerful tool here is writing your own 3 cold truths, short, steady, emotionless. They use ambiguity to make me chase. When I explain, they gain leverage. I don't need their approval to know what's true. Every time your mind spirals into longing or doubt, you read those lines like stakes in the ground. Finally, change your definition of success. Success is not never thinking about them. Success is thinking may happen, but I no longer act from the old reflex. That is how you retrain your brain. Thoughts can arrive, but ownership of behavior has changed hands. Layer 3. Behavior, silence, discipline, and no explanation boundaries. The final layer is where everything becomes real. Behavior. You can understand a lot, see the patterns clearly, but if your actions still leave doors open, a narcissist still has an entry point. The rule here is simple. Fewer words, stronger structure. Silence discipline is not ignoring them to punish them. It is a policy. You decide in advance. When they send vague hooks, bait, or provocations, you do not respond quickly. And often, you do not respond at all. Not because you are weak, but because you refuse to supply data to someone mapping your nervous system. If you must respond legal issues, co-parenting, work, you use 1 sentence 1.0 emotion. I will only discuss the child's schedule. I won't discuss anything else. Or, I disagree. I'm ending this conversation now. No extra reasons, no storytelling, no revisiting the past. The reason is direct. With a narcissist, explanations are side doors. The more you explain, the more material they can twist to pull you into argument. A boundary without explanation is a boundary with force. Next, you need a return plan, because they often reappear when you are softer. Birthdays, holidays, the moment you feel slightly better, or right after a small win in your life. The plan has 3 concrete steps. 1. Response rule. 24 hours of silence before replying to anything. 2. Check rule. Ask, what do they need from my reaction? 3. Action rule. If you respond, use a pre-written template, maximum 2 sentences, no new topics. Prepare for 3 escalations. Victim performance, rage and emotional debt collecting, or flaunting a new person to trigger jealousy. For each, you use 1 door-locking action. Victims do not get rescue. Rage ends the conversation. Comparison gets 0 reaction. Most importantly, rebuild your life so there is no place for them to lodge themselves. Your space, schedule, friendships, habits, goals. Fill your life with what is real. Work, health, skill building, reconnection with family, repaired sleep, small daily joys. Narcissists attach hardest to empty space. When your life fills up, there is no soft ground left for their hooks. This is the closing layer. You do not win by arguing. You win by becoming a system they can no longer access. Once everything is named correctly, a cold but liberating truth becomes obvious. What kept you trapped was never that they were powerful, but that you were pulled into a system where your reactions became their fuel. They leave, they return, they test 1 door, then slam another. They manufacture ambiguity, they provoke emotion, and then they watch you spin inside a storm you mistake for love. But the further you go, the clearer it becomes. This was never a story about a breakup. This is a story about access. Who has access to your nervous system? Who can press your buttons, pull you out of your reality, force you to explain, force you to prove, force you to doubt yourself? And the moment you realize the so-called discard is an illusion, a staged shock designed to reset power and push you into fixing what you never broke, the game starts losing its grip. Because this game only works as long as you believe you need them to close the story, need them to explain the truth, need them to confirm that you are not crazy, not wrong, not too sensitive. When you stop needing, they stop having a place to stand. That is why the final step is not about outsmarting them, arguing better, or striking back harder. The final step is whether you are willing to leave the stage, whether you can allow a story without a beautiful ending to still be over, Whether you can accept that some people do not come to love, they come to operate you like a system, switching you on and off whenever it serves them. And if that is true, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop supplying power to that machine. This is where you return to the 3 practical layers of defense, because this is what turns awareness into freedom. The nervous system layer is where you close the activation gate, cut contact channels, reduce triggers, rebuild sleep, eating rhythm, breathing rhythm, daily rhythm. The cognitive layer is where you change the question from, "Do they love me?" to "What do they need from my reaction?" And the behavioral layer is disciplined silence, without explaining, boundaries with consequences, and a plan for what happens when they come back. These 3 layers are not designed to defeat a narcissist. They are designed to stop you from being pulled. Because the truth is, you do not need to win. You only need to disappear from the stage. You do not need revenge. You only need to withdraw access. And when you withdraw access long enough, you will notice something strange. The initial withdrawal, the restlessness, the urge to text, to check, to prove, to correct, is not a sign that you are weak. It is a sign your nervous system is dismantling conditioning. Discomfort is a phase, not a destiny. It is your body relearning how to live without monitoring an unpredictable person. You will move through it if you understand the mechanism and have enough discipline not to return for another dose. And then one day, quietly, you look back and realize, you no longer think in terms of what they did, you think in terms of how I got out. You are no longer haunted by whether they will return, because their return is no longer a major event in your life. What matters is that you have returned to your memory, to your emotions, to your reality, to your right to live without permission, without explaining, without shrinking so someone else can feel okay. And if you are in the hardest silence right now, remember this: you did not lose them. You are reclaiming yourself. Your silence does not end them, it restarts you.